Unaware of their 100 million inheritance, their uncles threw them out after their parents died. A fortune awaited while they suffered on the streets, betrayed by their own blood. Little did they know that karma would soon turn the tables in the most unexpected way. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Jennifer Smith pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching raindrops race down the window like the tears she refused to shed. The Atlanta skyline blurred through the downpour, gray and unforgiving, much like the past week had been. The 19-year-old's shoulders carried an invisible weight as her three younger brothers huddled close behind her, their small hands seeking comfort she wasn't sure she could provide. "Jen, when are Mom and Dad coming back?" 6-year-old David whispered, his voice cracking with confusion. Jennifer turned from the window, kneeling to meet his eyes that mirrored her own, yet remained innocent to the permanence of death. "Remember what we talked about at the funeral," she said softly, gathering all three boys into her arms. Marcus and Daniel, the middle brothers, remained silent but watchful, processing their grief in their own ways. Marcus clutched his favorite book while Daniel methodically arranged and rearranged a handful of coins, his way of creating order in a world suddenly thrown into chaos. The doorbell's harsh ring shattered their moment of quiet mourning. Jennifer opened the front door to find her uncles, Robert Smith and Michael Smith, standing shoulder to shoulder like sentinels of bad news. Their expressions were carved from stone, devoid of the grief one might expect after losing a brother. "We need to discuss arrangements," Uncle Robert stated flatly, brushing past Jennifer without waiting for an invitation. His expensive cologne lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the lingering scent of funeral flowers. Uncle Michael followed, his calculating gaze sweeping across the family home as if mentally cataloging its contents. "The bank contacted us this morning," he announced, placing a folder on the kitchen table. "There's no will, Jennifer. The house reverts to next of kin." "That's impossible," Jennifer protested, her voice stronger than she felt. "Dad always said everything was taken care of." "Well, he was wrong," Michael replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You have until tonight to collect your things." The next few hours passed in a nightmarish blur. Jennifer moved mechanically, stuffing clothes into bags while trying to shield her brothers from the harsh reality unfolding around them. By nightfall, the four siblings stood on the rain-soaked sidewalk, their entire lives reduced to a single duffel bag of clothes and a cardboard box containing faded family photographs. David clung to Jennifer's hand, his small body shivering despite the warm Atlanta night. Marcus held the box of photos against his chest like a shield, while Daniel stood unnaturally still, his eyes fixed on the only home they'd ever known. "Where are we going?" Marcus finally asked, his voice barely audible above the rain. Jennifer squeezed his shoulder, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Together," she answered. "We're going together." Atlanta's streets offered no mercy to the Smith siblings. Jennifer quickly discovered that the initial wave of sympathy from acquaintances evaporated like morning dew under the harsh sun of reality. Phone calls went unanswered, and doors that had once welcomed their family now remained firmly shut. After 3 desperate days of searching, Jennifer Smith found their new home, a damp basement unit in East Atlanta that the landlord rented for cash, no questions asked. The walls wept with moisture, dark patches of mildew spreading like bruises across the concrete. Even in the summer heat, the floor remained eerily cold against their bare feet, as if the ground itself rejected their presence. "It's just temporary," she assured her brothers as they huddled together that first night, their few possessions stacked in the corner. David clung to her arm, his 6-year-old eyes wide with uncertainty. Marcus tried to be brave, organizing their meager belongings, while Daniel silently calculated how long their remaining money would last. Jennifer's determination grew fiercer with each new challenge. When the basement flooded during a thunderstorm, she stayed up all night moving their things to higher ground. When the electricity failed, she taught her brothers to read by candlelight. Her own fear and exhaustion remained carefully hidden behind a mask of confidence she wore for their sake. "We stay together, no matter what," she promised them one evening, the words becoming their family mantra. Nothing is more important than that. Within 2 weeks, the 19-year-old had secured 3 jobs: morning shifts at a local diner, evening hours stocking shelves at a grocery store, and late-night cleaning at a downtown office building. Her days became an endless cycle of work, her body moving on autopilot while her mind remained fixed on survival. The basement gradually transformed under their care. Jennifer hung blankets to separate sleeping areas, giving each brother a semblance of privacy. They collected discarded furniture from curbs and dumpsters, scrubbing each piece clean before bringing it inside. A wobbly table became their dining space, where they shared whatever food Jennifer could afford. On particularly difficult nights, when the boys were finally asleep, she would slip outside and allow herself 5 minutes of tears, never more, before straightening her shoulders and returning to her siblings. The weight of responsibility pressed down relentlessly, but she refused to buckle. The Smith children would stay together, even if it meant Jennifer had to sacrifice everything else. David Smith had always been the sunshine of the family. At 6 years old, he'd been full of giggles and innocent questions, but in the weeks following their parents' funeral, he retreated into himself like a turtle hiding in its shell. Jennifer noticed it first in the way he would curl up in the corner of their damp basement apartment, clutching his worn teddy bear with white knuckles. "He hasn't spoken more than 10 words today," Marcus whispered to his older sister one evening, as they watched their youngest brother stare blankly at the mildew-spotted wall. Jennifer's heart shattered a little more each time David flinched at the sound of a car backfiring or when the upstairs neighbors argued. The nightmares were the worst, his tiny body thrashing against invisible demons, waking up screaming for parents who would never come. She would hold him close, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed herself. "It's like he's disappearing," Daniel observed one morning, his analytical mind trying to make sense of their brother's withdrawal. "Like he's here but not really." Jennifer knew they needed help, beyond what she could provide. Working 3 jobs left her exhausted, but David's silence terrified her more than her own fatigue. Desperate for a solution, she remembered Mrs. Shin Johnson, her former choir teacher who had often spoken fondly of Jennifer's mother during high school. The 19-year-old swallowed her pride and made the call from a payphone outside the grocery store where she worked morning shift. "I don't have much to offer," Jennifer admitted, her voice cracking. "But David needs someone." Mrs. Johnson arrived at their basement apartment the following Sunday, her silver hair neatly pinned and carrying a small keyboard. The elderly teacher took one look at the withdrawn child and sat beside him without demanding attention or response. "Your mother had the voice of an angel," she told David softly, playing a gentle melody. "She used to sing this very song when she was worried about something." For the first time in weeks, the youngest Smith sibling looked up with genuine interest. Mrs. Johnson began teaching him simple notes, and by the end of the hour David had hummed along to 3 songs. "Music speaks when words fail," the teacher explained to Jennifer afterward. "It might be his way back to you." The weekly lessons became David's lifeline, a thread connecting him to the mother he was already struggling to remember. Jennifer would sometimes pause outside the door, listening to his small voice growing stronger through melody, and feel a flicker of hope warm her chest. In those moments, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps they could survive this after all. Marcus Smith had always been the one with questions that never seemed to end. At 9 years old, his curious mind constantly searched for answers, especially now when their world had been turned upside down. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, while the other students at East Atlanta Elementary rushed to finish their assignments, Marcus lingered in the school library, working on a project about inheritance laws. What started as a simple assignment became something more when he noticed peculiar inconsistencies in public records. The young boy's fingers traced over documents showing his father's estate, his brow furrowing as he compared dates and signatures. Something didn't add up. The papers mentioned properties and accounts that his uncles had never disclosed. "Miss Parker, can I make copies of these?" he asked the librarian, who nodded sympathetically. She had heard about the Smith children's situation through the neighborhood grapevine. That evening, in their damp basement apartment, Marcus waited until David had fallen asleep before approaching Jennifer. His oldest sister was slumped at their makeshift dining table, actually just a wooden board balanced on milk crates, her eyes heavy from working 3 consecutive shifts. "Jen, I found something weird," he whispered, carefully laying out the photocopied documents. "Dad's name is on all these papers, but Uncle Robert told us there was nothing left." Jennifer straightened, exhaustion momentarily forgotten, as she examined her brother's discovery. Despite being only 19, responsibilities had aged her face, but curiosity now brightened her tired eyes. "Where did you find these?" she asked, voice hushed to avoid waking the others. "Public records. For my school project," Marcus explained. "The dates don't match what Uncle Michael told us at the funeral." Something kicked in Jennifer's mind. She reached for an old notebook and began writing furiously, documenting every strange interaction with their uncles since their parents' death. The late-night visits to their parents' home before they were evicted, the missing family photo albums, the strange phone calls she'd overheard. "We need to keep this between us for now," she told Marcus, squeezing his shoulder. "Daniel might help us with the numbers later, but let's not worry David with this yet." Marcus nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of their discovery. Jennifer stared at the documents, a spark of determination replacing her fatigue. She didn't fully understand what they'd found, but her instincts, the same ones that had kept her brothers fed, and together these past months, screamed that the truth about their parents' legacy was being deliberately buried. "We'll figure this out," she promised, pulling Marcus into a tight hug. "Whatever they're hiding, we'll find it." Daniel Smith had always been good with numbers. While Jennifer worked her 3 jobs and Marcus researched inheritance laws, 12-year-old Daniel began tracking their uncle's financial activities with an intensity that surprised even his siblings. "Something doesn't make sense," he told Jennifer one evening, showing her a notebook filled with meticulously recorded dates and amounts. The boy had been collecting discarded ATM receipts that Robert and Michael had carelessly tossed away during their infrequent visits to check on the property they'd claimed. Jennifer examined her brother's notes, impressed by his attention to detail. Daniel had documented large cash withdrawals and suspicious deposits that seemed to appear like clockwork each month. "They're spending money that shouldn't exist," Daniel explained, his young face serious beyond his years. "Dad's company wasn't worth much according to what Uncle Robert told the court. But these numbers tell a different story." Jennifer ruffled his hair affectionately. "You might be onto something," she whispered, not wanting to get his hopes up, but recognizing the analytical mind her father had always praised in his third child. One particularly cold night, while the siblings huddled in their basement apartment, Daniel was helping Jennifer prepare dinner from their dwindling supplies. He reached for their mother's old cookbook, one of the few personal items they'd managed to save, when something fell from between its pages. "Jen, look at this," he called, holding up a sealed envelope with their father's handwriting. The siblings gathered around as Jennifer carefully opened it, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a letter dated just 2 weeks before their parents' accident. "My dear children," she read aloud, her voice catching. "If you're reading this, something has happened to your mother and me. There are things I couldn't tell you, accounts I've kept hidden for your protection. Trust no one but each other. The key is in the numbers, just as I always taught Daniel." The letter continued with cryptic references to account numbers and banking codes that made little sense to Jennifer, but Daniel's eyes widened with recognition. "It's a cipher," he whispered. "Dad taught me this. It's how we used to send secret messages." Jennifer carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. "We need to keep this safe," she said, looking at each of her brothers, "and we can't let Robert or Michael know we found it." That night, after the younger boys had fallen asleep, Jennifer sat alone, rereading the letter by the dim light of her smartphone. Her father's words hinted at something valuable, something worth hiding, something worth stealing. For the first time since their parents' death, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps they weren't as abandoned as they thought. In the cramped basement apartment in East Atlanta, Jennifer Smith found strength in creating small moments of normalcy. Every Sunday morning, no matter how exhausted she felt from her night shifts, she would rise before her brothers to prepare pancakes on their second-hand hot plate. The ritual began as a way to stretch their meager food budget, but transformed into something sacred, just like Mom used to make, she would say, flipping the slightly misshapen circles while David watched with wide eyes. The 6-year-old rarely spoke these days, but his face would light up as the familiar scent filled their damp living space. Evening prayers became another anchor. Jennifer gathered her brothers in a tight circle each night, their hands linked as they whispered thanks for another day together. Marcus, always the thoughtful one, started adding specific gratitudes for a teacher's kindness, for finding an extra quarter on the sidewalk, for the library books that transported them beyond their circumstances. Remember how Dad used to make cornbread? Daniel asked one evening, his fingers tracing numbers in his worn notebook. The analytical child had been calculating their expenses, but memories interrupted his budgeting. Jennifer seized the opportunity, scraping together ingredients for a cornbread dinner that Friday. The recipe wasn't perfect. She couldn't afford all the proper ingredients, but the familiar taste brought tears to their eyes and stories to their lips. Dad always burned the edges. Marcus laughed, his first genuine smile in weeks, and Mom would pretend not to notice. Jennifer added, watching her brothers momentarily forget their troubles. These small traditions became lifelines in their uncertain existence, threads connecting their past to whatever future awaited them. The local community noticed their struggle, responding with quiet generosity. Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor who lived 2 doors down, appeared regularly with containers of homemade food. The woman never made them feel like charity cases, instead presenting each dish as an opportunity to share stories. "Your mother once helped me when my arthritis was bad," she told Jennifer one evening, setting down a steaming pot of stew. "She drove me to 3 different doctors, until we found one who listened." The siblings absorbed these tales hungrily, collecting fragments of their parents' lives like precious gems. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke of their father's kindness to neighbors, their mother's beautiful singing voice, details that helped the children hold on to memories that threatened to fade. "Your parents were good people," the elderly woman would say, her weathered hand squeezing Jennifer's shoulder. "They would be so proud of how you're keeping this family together." Those words sustained Jennifer through the darkest nights, when doubt crept in and the weight of responsibility felt crushing. In these small moments of connection and tradition, the Smith siblings found the courage to face another day. Jennifer Smith's life had become a blur of exhaustion. By day, she would drag herself to the grocery store, stocking shelves and working the register with a forced smile. Evenings found her serving greasy food at a small diner in East Atlanta, where the tips were meager but the manager let her take home leftover food for her brothers. And late at night, when most people were sleeping, she mopped floors and emptied trash cans at a downtown office building, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across her tired face. The physical toll was immense. Her hands had grown calloused from constant work, and dark circles had become permanent fixtures beneath her eyes. One night, while cleaning the 20th floor offices, Jennifer simply collapsed. She woke to find the night security guard standing over her with concern etched across his weathered face. "You can't keep going like this," he said, helping her to a chair and offering his thermos of coffee. But what choice did she have? The basement apartment they called home cost nearly everything she made, and the boys needed food, clothes, and school supplies. Marcus had outgrown his shoes, David needed his asthma medication, and Daniel had torn his only pair of pants. The social worker who occasionally checked on them made it clear that if Jennifer couldn't provide adequately, the system would separate them. On particularly difficult nights, when her body ached and her spirit wavered, Jennifer would find herself staring at a faded photograph of her parents. What would they think of her now? The dreams she once had, college, travel, a career in music, seemed like distant fantasies from someone else's life. Yet each time despair threatened to overwhelm her, Jennifer would return to their cramped basement and find renewed purpose. Her brothers would be curled up together on the mattress they shared, David's small hand clutching Marcus's shirt, Daniel's arm protectively draped over both of them. Their faces, peaceful in sleep, held complete trust in her ability to keep them safe. In those quiet moments, watching their chests rise and fall, Jennifer would feel a fierce love surge through her exhaustion. They were still together, they still had each other, and somehow that made all the difference. Miss Rodriguez had noticed Jennifer's deteriorating condition and started leaving containers of homemade food by their door. "You're too thin," the elderly woman would scold gently whenever they crossed paths. "Your mama would want you to eat." Jennifer accepted this help with reluctant gratitude. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. For her brothers, she would work until her body gave out. For them, she would sacrifice everything. Jennifer Smith discovered that navigating the legal system was like wandering through a labyrinth with constantly shifting walls. The Atlanta family court was an intimidating place for a 19-year-old with 3 dependent brothers and no stable income. Every morning she would arrive early, clutching a folder of carefully organized documents, dark circles under her eyes from her night shifts at the downtown office building. "You're simply too young," one social worker had told her bluntly. 3 growing boys need stability, a proper home, consistent meals, adult supervision. The woman's words stung, but Jennifer refused to let her brothers be separated into different foster homes. The custody hearings became a monthly ordeal. Jennifer would rush from her grocery store job, changing from her uniform in the courthouse bathroom, before facing the stern-faced judge who seemed perpetually skeptical of her capabilities. She learned legal terminology by necessity, staying up late with borrowed library books after her brothers had fallen asleep in their cramped basement apartment in East Atlanta. "Your Honor," she argued during their 3rd hearing, "I've maintained perfect attendance at their school meetings. David's nightmares are less frequent now. Marcus and Daniel are both on the honor roll." Her voice trembled but never broke. "We're a family. We need to stay together." What Jennifer lacked in resources, she made up for in meticulous preparation. She brought letters from Miss Rodriguez, who testified to the siblings' responsible behavior and tight-knit bond. The elderly neighbor had become their strongest advocate, telling anyone who would listen how Jennifer managed to create a loving home despite impossible circumstances. Miss Johnson also appeared at a crucial hearing, explaining how David was flourishing in his music lessons. "I've taught children for 40 years, the retired choir teacher stated firmly. "These siblings support each other in ways many traditional families don't." The turning point came when the boys themselves were interviewed. Daniel, analytical as always, presented a detailed budget, showing how Jennifer stretched every dollar. Marcus brought his school projects, proudly displaying his improved grades. But it was 6-year-old David who truly moved the court, his small voice unwavering as he declared, "Jenny reads to us every night, even when she's tired. She never forgets." Slowly, the system that seemed designed to separate them began to bend. The judge, who had once looked at Jennifer with doubt, now nodded with something approaching respect. The social worker who had been assigned to their case started bringing job listings and resource information instead of foster care paperwork. Jennifer wasn't just fighting bureaucracy. She was redefining what family could look like in the eyes of the law. The confrontation happened on a rainy Tuesday outside the grocery store, where Jennifer Smith worked her evening shift. Belle Smith, her cousin, had been waiting by the employee entrance, her face twisted with an emotion Jennifer couldn't immediately place. "Must be nice playing the tragic orphan," Belle spat as Jennifer approached, umbrella in hand. "Everyone feeling sorry for you and your brothers." Jennifer sighed, too exhausted to engage. 9 months of working 3 jobs had hollowed her out, leaving little energy for family drama. "Not now, Belle. I need to get home to the boys." "You think you're so special," Belle continued, following her into the parking lot. "Your dad always favored your mom over the rest of us, and now you 4 get to be the poor little victims everyone loves." Jennifer stopped walking. Something in Belle's tone caught her attention. "What are you talking about?" "Like you don't know." Belle laughed bitterly. "The inheritance. Uncle Robert told my dad everything." The world seemed to tilt beneath Jennifer's feet. "What inheritance?" Belle's expression shifted from anger to confusion, then to horrified realization. "You really don't know, do you?" she whispered. In that moment, beneath the harsh parking lot lights, Belle revealed what she'd overheard, hushed conversations between their uncles about documents that needed to disappear, about accounts that would be impossible to trace. "They said your dad left everything to you for," Belle admitted, her voice small now. "They said no one would believe a 19-year-old girl anyway." Jennifer stood motionless as rain soaked through her thin jacket. The pieces clicked together, the suspicious haste with which Robert and Michael had cleared them out, the missing papers from her father's office, the strange comments about taking care of business. It hadn't been callousness, it had been Kaliash. That night, Jennifer walked the 3 miles back to their basement apartment, her mind racing. When she arrived, Daniel was helping Marcus with homework, while David practiced a song Mrs. Johnson had taught him. Their faces turned to her expectantly, trusting her completely. Jennifer set her bag down with unusual deliberation. For months she'd seen herself as merely surviving, keeping her brothers fed, housed, together. But Belle's accidental revelation had changed everything. "We need to talk," she told her brothers, her voice steadier than it had been in months. "I think our uncles have been lying to us, and I think it's time we fight back." As she explained what she'd learned, Jennifer felt something shift inside her. They weren't just victims of circumstance anymore. They were survivors with a purpose, a family united against injustice. And for the first time since the funeral, Jennifer allowed herself to feel something dangerous: hope. The turning point arrived on a rainy Sunday when Jennifer Smith was too exhausted to attend church. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor who had become like a grandmother to the siblings, went alone, carrying their struggles in her heart. During the post-service gathering, she found herself seated beside Sarah Davis, a 28-year-old attorney whose idealism hadn't yet been crushed by the legal system. "These children," Mrs. Rodriguez explained, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, "they lost everything. The uncles, such cruel men, threw them onto the street after their parents died. Jennifer works 3 jobs just to feed her brothers." Sarah listened intently, her coffee growing cold. Something about the story resonated with her own childhood struggles. The next day she appeared at the basement apartment, legal briefcase in hand and determination in her eyes. "I believe there's more to your parents' estate than your uncles claim," Sarah told Jennifer, as David peeked shyly from behind his sister's legs. "I'll represent you for a percentage of whatever we recover, nothing up front." Jennifer studied the young attorney's face, searching for deception but finding only genuine concern. For the first time since the funeral, she felt a flicker of hope warming her chest. "Why would you help us?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ancient refrigerator. "Because someone helped my family once," Sarah replied simply, "and because what happened to you isn't just sad, it's wrong." Within days, Sarah began untangling the web of deceit. She taught Jennifer how to request bank statements, access public records, and document every suspicious transaction. The dining table, a wobbly second-hand piece, became command central, covered with papers, sticky notes, and timelines. Marcus and Daniel proved invaluable, their young minds spotting patterns the adults missed. Even little David contributed by remembering snippets of conversations he'd overheard between their parents before the accident. "Dad always said to check the safety deposit box if anything happened," he whispered one evening, the memory surfacing unexpectedly while Sarah reviewed documents. The attorney's eyes widened. "Which bank?" she asked gently. That single question opened a door they hadn't known existed. Jennifer remembered her father visiting Atlanta First National every month, a ritual she'd never questioned. As they worked late into the night, the siblings sharing memories while Sarah took notes, Jennifer realized something profound had shifted. They were no longer just surviving, they were fighting back. For the first time since becoming her brother's guardian, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond mere subsistence. "We might actually win this," she whispered to Sarah as they pored over documents. The attorney nodded. "We just might." Sarah Davis sat across from Jennifer at a small coffee shop, her expression a mix of triumph and disbelief. "I've been digging into the background of Thomas Wilson, the lawyer who handled your parents' estate," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "He was disbarred last year for multiple counts of fraud and tampering with legal documents." Jennifer's hands trembled as she opened the folder. For months she had wondered if she was chasing ghosts, if her suspicions about her uncles were just grief manifesting as paranoia. Now validation stared back at her from official documents. "There's more," Sarah continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I contacted every bank your father had dealings with. Atlantic Trust had a digital backup system installed 6 months before your parents died. They keep records for 7 years. Jennifer's heart pounded. "And fragments, Jennifer. Fragments of the original will survive on their server. It's not complete, but it explicitly names you and your brothers as beneficiaries of a trust." Tears welled in Jennifer's eyes as she thought of her brothers waiting at home. Daniel with his notebooks full of financial calculations, Marcus with his library research, and little David who still cried for their parents at night. "This changes everything," the 19-year-old whispered, gripping the edge of the table. That evening Jennifer spread her collection of evidence across their basement apartment floor. For 2 years she had documented every suspicious conversation, every strange visit from Uncle Robert and Uncle Michael, every unexplained bank transaction Daniel had noticed. What had once seemed like the desperate actions of a grieving daughter now looked like the foundation of a legal case. Mrs. Rodriguez knocked softly at their door, bringing a homemade casserole. She gasped at the papers covering the floor. "Misha, what is all this?" "The truth," Jennifer replied, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "We're going to court." The elderly neighbor crossed herself. "Those men, they thought you were just children they could push around. They didn't count on your strength." Over the next week, Sarah prepared the initial filing. The attorney worked tirelessly, often staying up all night to prepare documents, while Jennifer worked her shifts at the diner and grocery store. When the court date was finally set, Jennifer gathered her brothers around their small table. "This won't be easy," she told them, looking at each face she had fought so hard to protect. "Uncle Robert and Uncle Michael will fight back. They might say terrible things about us, about Mom and Dad." Daniel, always the practical one, nodded solemnly. "But we have evidence now, real evidence, and we have each other," Marcus added. David, clutching his songbook from Mrs. Johnson's lessons, simply reached for Jennifer's hand. For the first time since that rainy night when they'd lost everything, hope wasn't just a word Jennifer used to comfort her brothers. It was real, tangible, and finally within reach. The story broke on a Wednesday morning. Jennifer Smith was wiping down tables at the diner when her smartphone buzzed with a dozen notifications. A local reporter had picked up their case, framing it as a modern-day David versus Goliath tale. By evening, news vans lined the narrow street outside their basement apartment in East Atlanta. "They're saying we're heroes," Marcus whispered, peering through the curtains at the growing media presence. Jennifer gently pulled him away from the window, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten, as she processed this unexpected development. Within 48 hours, their faces appeared on national broadcasts. Reporters dissected every angle of their story: the orphaned siblings fighting against wealthy relatives, the mysterious missing inheritance, the teenage guardian working 3 jobs to keep her family together. The public was captivated. Miss Rodriguez fielded journalists at her door, protecting the children's privacy while carefully sharing stories that painted their struggle in a sympathetic light. "These children deserve justice," the elderly neighbor told a popular morning show. "Their parents would be proud of how they've stayed together." The attention created a strange duality in their lives. Sarah Davis, their attorney, explained how the publicity could help their case. "The courts move differently when people are watching," she said, organizing the stack of documents on their wobbly kitchen table. Yet danger lurked beneath the sudden fame. Jennifer was leaving her night shift at the downtown office building when a black automobile pulled alongside her in the deserted parking lot. Robert and Michael Smith stepped out, their faces hardened with anger. "You think these cameras will protect you?" Robert hissed, blocking her path to the bus stop. "This will all blow over, and you'll be left with nothing but embarrassment." Michael moved closer. "Drop the case now, and maybe we can arrange something small for you kids. Push this further, and you'll regret it." Jennifer clutched her keys between her fingers, heart pounding as she stood her ground. "We already have nothing because of you," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "What else could you possibly take?" A security guard's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sending her uncles retreating to their vehicle. Jennifer collapsed against the wall once they drove away, shaking uncontrollably. The confrontation only strengthened her resolve. When she returned home, she found Daniel meticulously documenting every threatening interaction on his battered laptop. "Evidence," he explained simply. The media spotlight forced local authorities to revisit previously dismissed complaints. Detective Wilson, who had once brushed off Jennifer's concerns, now requested formal interviews with all parties involved. Sometimes, Mrs. Johnson told David during his singing lesson, "The truth needs witnesses to be heard." The boy nodded solemnly, understanding more than his 6 years should allow. For better or worse, their private struggle had become a public spectacle, and there was no turning back now. Daniel Smith had always been the one with a natural affinity for numbers. While his siblings were sleeping, he'd often stay up late, poring over financial documents he'd secretly collected from their uncle's trash. One evening, while organizing his findings in their cramped basement apartment in East Atlanta, he discovered a business card tucked between some discarded papers. "William Hayes, Tech Investments," Daniel whispered to himself, immediately recognizing the name from conversations he'd overheard between his uncles. The next day, instead of going straight to school, The determined boy took a bus across town to the address on the card. William Hayes was shocked to find a child standing in his office doorway. "You look just like your father," he said, inviting Daniel in. The aging businessman's eyes grew misty as he explained how he and Daniel's father had founded a startup together 15 years ago. "Your dad was brilliant. He kept his ownership stake when I bought him out. That little company, it's worth billions now." Jennifer was preparing dinner when Daniel burst through the door of their basement home, breathless with excitement. "Jen, I found Dad's business partner," he exclaimed, waving a folder of documents. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had stopped by with a homemade casserole, smiled warmly at the boy's enthusiasm. As Daniel explained what he'd learned, Jennifer's hands trembled. According to Hayes, their father had established a trust fund for his children that had grown to over $100 million. The paperwork Daniel brought home confirmed everything: the account numbers, the growth projections, even copies of the original agreements. "This is why they wanted us gone," Jennifer whispered, thinking of Robert and Michael Smith's cold faces the night they'd thrown the siblings onto the street. "They've been stealing from us all this time." Marcus looked up from his homework, eyes wide. "We're Not yet," Jennifer cautioned, her mind racing through the implications. The 19-year-old guardian knew that with such high stakes, their uncles would fight even harder to keep them silenced. She thought of the confrontation in the parking lot last week, how Robert had gripped her arm and warned her to stop digging. That night, after her brothers were asleep, Jennifer called Sarah Davis. The young attorney listened intently before saying, "This changes everything." "But Jennifer, be careful. People have done terrible things for much less money." As she hung up the phone, Jennifer glanced at her brothers sleeping peacefully across their shared room. The knowledge of their inheritance was both a blessing and a curse, a promise of security, but also a target on their backs. She quietly moved the kitchen chair against the door handle, a small protection against the storm she knew was coming. The date of the trial loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. Jennifer Smith sat at the rickety kitchen table in their basement apartment, surrounded by stacks of documents and yellow legal pads, filled with her meticulous notes. The digital evidence they'd discovered, fragments of their father's will on the bank's backup server, was their strongest lead. But Judge Wilson had expressed serious doubts about its admissibility. "The court is concerned about the time elapsed," Sarah Davis explained, her young face lined with worry as she paced the small room. 4 years is a long time in digital terms. The judge wants more corroborating evidence. Jennifer pushed her hair back, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Between her 3 jobs and caring for her brothers, she barely slept 4 hours a night. "We need witnesses," she whispered, "someone who knew Dad's intention." The attorney nodded, her determination matching Jennifer's own. Together they compiled a list of their parents' old colleagues, friends, and business associates. Many had moved away, changed numbers, or simply wanted nothing to do with a messy inheritance battle. Marcus helped by creating a detailed timeline of their father's business dealings, while Daniel used his numerical skills to track down financial connections that might lead to potential witnesses. Even little David contributed, remembering snippets of conversations he'd overheard before their parents died. For every small victory locating their father's former secretary who remembered discussions about the trust fund, there came crushing setbacks. Robert and Michael Smith filed motion after motion to delay proceedings, each one requiring Sarah's immediate attention and draining their limited resources. "They're trying to wear us down," Jennifer told her brothers one evening, after tucking David into bed. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like concrete. "They think if they drag this out long enough, we'll give up." The courthouse became Jennifer's second home as she filed paperwork between shifts at the diner and grocery store. One rainy Tuesday, she nearly collapsed in the clerk's office, her body finally rebelling against the relentless pace she'd maintained for years. Mrs. Rodriguez found her sitting on the courthouse steps, shaking with fatigue. The elderly neighbor wrapped a warm shawl around Jennifer's shoulders and brought her home for a proper meal. "You cannot pour from an empty cup, Nina," she said firmly, setting a steaming bowl of soup before the exhausted young woman. "Your brothers need you strong." That night, as Jennifer lay awake listening to her brother's steady breathing, she wondered if she had the strength to continue. The trial was still weeks away, and their uncles seemed to have endless resources to fight them. But when Marcus mumbled in his sleep about their mother, Jennifer's resolve hardened once more. They would face whatever obstacles came next together. The news spread through the community like wildfire. 6-year-old David Smith had won the prestigious Atlanta Youth Voices competition. His rendition of Amazing Grace had left the judges in tears, his small voice carrying the weight of loss and hope that no child his age should understand. Jennifer couldn't believe it when Mrs. Johnson called, her voice trembling with excitement. The choir teacher had entered David in the contest without telling them, hoping to nurture the talent she'd spotted during their weekly lessons. He sang for his mother, Mrs. Johnson explained over the phone. Everyone felt it. The prize was $2,000 more money than the siblings had seen since losing their parents. That night, as they gathered in their damp basement apartment, David clutched the envelope to his chest, his eyes serious beyond his years. "I want Sarah to have it," he announced, looking up at Jennifer, "so she can help us get our home back." Marcus and Daniel exchanged glances, then nodded in agreement. Jennifer knelt before her youngest brother, her heart swelling with pride and grief. This child, who still had nightmares about the night they were forced onto the street, was offering his moment of triumph to further their fight. "Are you sure?" she asked, brushing his hair from his forehead. David nodded solemnly. "Mom would want us to stay together. Sarah helps us do that." The following day, they visited Sarah Davis at her modest office downtown. The young attorney had been working their case mostly pro bono, squeezing their meetings between paying clients. When David presented the envelope, Sarah's professional composure cracked. "I can't take this," she protested, but David's determined expression stopped her. "It's for the papers and stuff," he explained simply. "For the judge to see." Sarah knelt to his level, accepting the gift with the gravity it deserved. "This will help more than you know," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The story of David's sacrifice somehow leaked to local media. Mrs. Rodriguez later admitted she'd mentioned it to her church prayer group, never expecting it would travel further. But by week's end, a small article appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, highlighting the Smith siblings' struggle and David's selfless contribution to their legal battle. People began recognizing them at the grocery store, where Jennifer worked night shifts, at the boys' school, even at the courthouse during preliminary hearings. Strangers offered encouragement, shared similar stories of family betrayal, or simply nodded in solidarity. For the first time since their parents' death, Jennifer felt they weren't alone. Their private pain had become a shared story of resilience that resonated beyond their circumstance. The siblings' bond, forged in loss and strengthened through sacrifice, had become a beacon for others navigating their own darkness. As they walked home that evening, hand in hand, Jennifer realized they had gained something their uncles could never take away. The courtroom fell silent as William Parker, the former family lawyer, took the stand. His hands trembled as he adjusted his tie, avoiding eye contact with Jennifer Smith, who sat rigid in the front row, flanked by her brothers. Sarah Davis approached the witness stand with calculated precision, her questions cutting through the tension like a knife. "Did you, or did you not destroy the original will of James and Elizabeth Smith?" Sarah asked, her voice echoing through the hushed chamber. Parker's composure crumbled. After months of denials, the truth finally spilled out. "Yes," he whispered, then cleared his throat. "Yes, I destroyed it." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Jennifer reached for Daniel's hands, squeezing it tightly as her youngest brother David buried his face against her shoulder. "At whose request?" Sarah pressed. "Robert and Michael Smith," Parker admitted, his voice breaking. "They paid me $20,000 to make the will disappear and claim it never existed." The attorney detailed how the uncles had orchestrated the entire scheme within hours of the parents' funeral, systematically erasing any trace of the substantial inheritance meant for the children. He described shredding documents, deleting files, and lying to the grieving siblings. "They knew about the tech company's shares?" Sarah asked. "They knew everything," Parker confirmed. "They calculated the value would reach 9 figures eventually." Jennifer's meticulous notes, scribbled on napkins during diner shifts, recorded in a worn journal between jobs, documented on her smartphone during rare moments of rest, were entered into evidence. Each suspicious conversation, each contradictory statement from her uncles, each mysterious bank transaction that Daniel had tracked, now formed a damning timeline of deception. From the witness stand, Parker couldn't look at the siblings. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I was in debt. They knew my weakness." Robert Smith sat stone-faced beside his brother Michael, whose complexion had turned ashen. Their attorney frantically whispered in their ears as the judge called for order among the murmuring spectators. Marcus, always observant, watched the jury's faces transform from skepticism to outrage. One elderly juror removed her glasses to wipe away tears. For Jennifer, the vindication was overwhelming. 4 years of exhaustion, of fighting the system while working 3 jobs, of creating a home in a moldy basement, of promising her brothers that justice would come, all of it crystallized in this moment. As the court adjourned for the day, reporters swarmed the courthouse step. Jennifer stood tall, her brothers beside her, no longer just survivors but witnesses to truth. The tide had turned, and for the first time since that rainy night when they lost everything, the path forward was illuminated with more than just hope. It shone with justice. The Atlanta courthouse buzzed with tension as Jennifer Smith clutched her brother's hands on the final day of their trial. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion, but determination kept her spine straight. The past 3 years had drained everything from her time, youth, dreams. Yet here they stood, on the precipice of either vindication or final defeat. Sarah Davis approached the bench with confident steps, her briefcase containing what they hoped would be their salvation. "Your Honor," she announced, "we've obtained critical evidence that confirms the existence of the trust agreement." The young attorney produced documentation from the bank's digital archives, a backup that Robert and Michael Smith had failed to erase in their haste to claim the fortune. The judge peered over his glasses, skepticism evident in his furrowed brow. "Ms. Davis, while compelling, digital records alone may not be sufficient, given the circumstances." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jennifer felt Marcus squeeze her hand while Daniel stared intently at the judge, calculating their odds as he always did. Little David pressed against her side, his small body tense with anxiety. It was then that Sarah revealed their final piece of evidence. "Yesterday afternoon we were granted access to the family safe deposit box." She carefully removed a sealed envelope, its edges yellowed with time. This letter was written by Edward Smith just days before his death. The court fell silent as the judge accepted the document. Jennifer's heart hammered in her chest. This was their father's voice reaching out from beyond, his final attempt to protect them. "I'll read the relevant portion," the judge said, clearing his throat. "To whoever finds this letter, I fear for my family's safety. Should anything happen to me and my wife, I beg you to ensure our children, Jennifer, Daniel, Marcus, and David, receive what is rightfully theirs. The trust fund established in their names contains everything I've built, approximately $100 million in assets and investments. My brothers know of its existence. Trust no one but Sarah at First Atlantic Bank." Tears streamed down Jennifer's face as her father's words filled the courtroom. She could almost hear his voice, steady and loving, as it had been when he tucked them in at night. Several jurors openly wept. Even the court reporter paused to dab at her eyes. The uncles shifted uncomfortably, their faces ashen as their deception unraveled before everyone. The judge removed his glasses, visibly. "This letter, combined with the digital records and testimony, presents compelling evidence of not only the trust's existence, but of deliberate attempts to defraud these children of their inheritance." Jennifer held her breath, 19 years of struggle and sacrifice hanging on this moment, as the judge prepared to deliver his ruling. The courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered the verdict. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours before reaching their unanimous decision. Jennifer Smith and her brothers were the rightful heirs to their father's fortune, now valued at over $100 million. Jennifer clutched David's small hand tightly as tears streamed down her face. For the first time in years, they were tears of relief rather than desperation. Marcus and Daniel embrace each other, their young shoulders finally unburdened from the weight they had carried for so long. "The court finds clear and convincing evidence of deliberate fraud perpetrated by Robert Smith and Michael Smith," the judge announced, her voice echoing through the packed courtroom. "They are hereby ordered to relinquish all assets belonging to the estate and to pay restitution for damages caused." The uncles sat stone-faced at the defense table, their elaborate scheme crumbling before their eyes. Robert refused to meet Jennifer's gaze, while Michael stared blankly ahead, his calculating demeanor finally shattered by justice. Sarah Davis, their tireless attorney, gathered her documents with trembling hands. "We did it," she whispered to Jennifer. "Your parents would be so proud of you." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps. Television cameras captured the moment as the four siblings emerged into the bright Atlanta sunlight. David, no longer the withdrawn child who flinched at shadows, stood tall beside his sister. Marcus, whose curiosity had uncovered the first threads of truth, beamed with quiet pride. Daniel, the numbers wizard, who had tracked their uncle's suspicious transactions, couldn't stop grinning. "Jennifer," reporters called out, "how does it feel to finally have justice?" The 19-year-old guardian, who had worked 3 jobs, slept on cold floors and sacrificed everything for her brothers, took a deep breath before answering. "This was never just about money," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "It was about truth. It was about family." Mrs. Rodriguez and Mrs. Johnson pushed through the crowd, embracing the children they had supported through the darkest days. The elderly neighbor wiped tears from her weathered face, whispering prayers of thanksgiving in Spanish. As they descended the courthouse steps, strangers reached out to touch them, to offer congratulations. Their story had captivated the nation, 4 orphaned siblings fighting against powerful adults who had betrayed them and winning against impossible odds. That night, in their basement apartment for the last time, Jennifer gathered her brothers close. "We're not victims anymore," she told them softly. "We never really were. We're survivors. We're family." And for the first time since their parents died, they all slept peacefully, without fear of what tomorrow might bring. The courthouse steps were finally quiet. The cameras had moved on to newer scandals, and the Smith siblings could breathe without the weight of scrutiny pressing down on them. 3 weeks after the verdict, Belle Smith approached their new apartment with trembling hands, clutching a weathered leather portfolio. Jennifer opened the door, her guard still up despite their victory. The cousins stood in awkward silence before Belle's composure cracked. "I should have come forward sooner," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I found these in my father's study after the trial started." The portfolio contained birth certificates, property deeds, and handwritten letters, a paper trail that would have shortened their ordeal by months. As Jennifer leafed through the documents, Belle explained how jealousy had consumed her when she discovered her own inheritance was minimal compared to her cousins. "I was so angry that Uncle James left everything to you 4, she admitted. "But watching what they did to you, what my silence allowed, I couldn't live with myself anymore." David, now more confident than the frightened 6-year-old of months past, brought Belle a glass of water. His simple act of kindness broke something in her, and the young woman sobbed openly as she accepted it. Sarah Davis arrived later that afternoon, her eyes widening at the treasure trove of evidence. "These documents seal everything," the attorney confirmed. "Your uncles can't appeal with these in our possession." That evening, after Belle had gone and the younger boys were asleep, Jennifer sat alone on their new balcony. The city lights of Atlanta sparkled below, so different from the view in their damp basement. For the first time in years, her shoulders weren't hunched with worry. Mrs. Rodriguez had brought over a traditional meal to celebrate, and Mrs. Johnson had left a card signed by the entire church congregation. Their community had carried them when they couldn't walk alone. Jennifer traced her finger over a photo of her parents, now framed and given a place of honor. "We did it," she whispered. The legacy her father had fought to protect wasn't just financial, it was the unbreakable bond between 4 siblings who refused to be separated. The next morning, Jennifer woke without an alarm for the first time in years. No early shift at the diner, no night cleaning at the office building. Instead, she made pancakes while Marcus and Daniel argued playfully over who would get the first batch. The battle had cost her years of her youth, but watching her brothers laugh freely in the sunlight, Jennifer knew every sleepless night had been worth it. They had not just survived, they had reclaimed their story. With the legal battle finally behind them, Jennifer Smith allowed herself to exhale for the first time in years. The weight that had pressed against her chest since that rainy funeral day gradually lifted as the inheritance was secured. Their father's $100 million legacy was now rightfully theirs, but Jennifer discovered that the true inheritance was the unbreakable bond forged through hardship. She began the slow process of healing, starting with simple pleasures she had denied herself for so long. Jennifer enrolled in college classes, pursuing the education she had abandoned to care for her brothers. Old friendships were rekindled over coffee in downtown Atlanta cafes, where she no longer counted pennies or worried about the time away from work. Most surprising was Thomas, a kind-eyed law student she met at the courthouse celebration, whose patient understanding helped her learn to trust again. David, now 9, transformed from the withdrawn child of their basement days into a confident performer. His voice, nurtured by Miss Johnson's faithful mentoring, earned him a coveted spot in Atlanta's prestigious youth choir. Every Sunday, Jennifer sat in the audience, tears streaming down her face as she watched him shine, knowing their mother would have been so proud. Marcus channeled his curiosity into academic excellence, his bedroom walls covered with certificates and science fair ribbons. The boy who once hunted for legal documents in the library now dreamed of becoming an attorney like Sarah Davis, who remained a cherished family friend and advisor. Daniel's numerical obsession evolved into remarkable financial acumen. At just 14, he worked with trusted advisors to establish a foundation supporting children who had lost parents. The first recipients were families from East Atlanta, where Miss Rodriguez still lived and continued to share her wisdom with the siblings. Their former basement apartment was purchased and transformed into a community center, providing resources for vulnerable families. Even Belle, their once jealous cousin, found redemption through volunteering there, slowly rebuilding trust with the family she had nearly helped destroy. The siblings never forgot those who stood by them during their darkest days. Miss Johnson received a music scholarship fund in her name, while Mrs. Rodriguez's home was renovated completely, though she refused to accept anything more extravagant. One evening, as they gathered for their traditional Sunday dinner, now held in their spacious new home, Jennifer looked around at her brothers' laughing faces and realized that their greatest victory wasn't the money. It was proving that when the world tries to tear a family apart, sometimes it only brings them closer together.